Okay, we're moving on to the second challenge problem, and I want to note that I've taken out all of the assumptions that I had put up here for the other challenge problem, for challenge problem 1, but I left the calculations in place. Now, I am going to take the revenue variable costs calculations out because those are going to differ depending on how you set up your model. But the rest of them, all these subtotals, your EBIT, your taxes, and all that kind of stuff, as long as you keep your assumptions in the same spot, then your depreciation calculation, for instance, is going to just automatically calculate. It's calculating as your equipment cost times the depreciation percentage for that year. So that's kind of a handy thing. It'll make our lives a little bit easier. But the thing about this problem, let's read through the instructions and then we'll talk about something different for this video than what I did live in class with you guys. So we've got, we're going to make some eye covers. We've got our initial investment in working capital, but working capital will increase or decrease each year, so that's always 25% of the anticipated revenue for the coming year. Right? So when you look at doing your change in working capital as part of your incremental cash flows, okay, that's going to pick up a different change every year. Now, as I said, I've got these calculated values remaining the way that they were in our prior examples, and I want to keep them that way because it's always easiest, as these models grow, you're going to have your cash flow calculations probably on separate pages, and the models and all the inputs are going to be really big, but as long as you're picking up the right inputs, your calculations will just flow, and you won't have to worry about, first of all, redoing data entry, and secondly, making mistakes. Okay, so what I want to do, let's make a couple of extra lines up here in the assumptions area to accommodate our changes in working capital. Right, so we'll get to that as we build this model. Okay, so the first thing, just enter a couple of lines after where we've got our working capital set up now. And then the other thing is, we'll basically just delete our existing cell references here in the change in net working capital line. And what I'll do is I'll just kind of give it a highlight to remember that we need to redo this line. Okay, so use highlighting to your advantage to help you solve these kinds of models. All right, so now we are looking for our initial investment in capital equipment is 11.5. And we don't have any design prototype issues here, so we can delete this row. Our makers for this example was actually the correct maker. So I went and picked those up from Google, basically, the correct makers percentages. So these are not abbreviated like they were in the first challenge problem. And you notice that even beginning here now, we've calculated our depreciation. Now, is this a 6-year project? Let's see. Yeah, so it's a 6-year project. So let's go ahead and give it another year for everything. So this is picking up year 6 and year 6 here. And we'll calculate year 6 all the way through. Take that out. Okay. Now, take that out too. All right, so I think I'm all set. So now what we want to do, the way that this information is given, we are just given the revenue and cost data. So let's go ahead and copy that. And what I'm going to do is paste them down below so that I can move them around within the spreadsheet rather than trying to copy them directly into our model. Again, the name of the game is you keep your models functioning and you add values outside of the model. All right, so let's go ahead and copy that to the clipboard. Copy and paste. All right. So now let's see, we've got our revenue here. You know what? Let's go ahead and use cell references here. So there's our revenue cell reference and our variable cost cell reference. And then our fixed cost is going to have two components. So the fixed cost is both for the manufacturing fixed and as well as for sales general administration fixed, which is fine. So we'll have it be that down here plus the SG&A. Okay, so there's all our revenue and cost numbers are all set. Bring those out all the way to year 6. Bring the depreciation and all the calculations out to year 6 as well. Make sure that everything is flowing correctly. So that's the downside of when you try to do this the lazy way, is you got to kind of go through afterwards and make sure that everything makes sense. So here we have year 6 here, picking everything up properly. That looks right. Depreciation should be that 5.67 times the 1.1 million. Oh, you know what's funny is I'm missing a 0 here. There. That makes a little more sense. Okay, so depreciation in year 6 is still working. Okay, so now let's go ahead and continue filling in our assumptions and see how we're doing with our cash flows here. So sales volume is C below, and growth rate NA, price NA, variable costs we're going to see below, fixed costs we're going to see below. All right, our tax rate here is 37%. And so that should now calculate the taxes, giving us our net income. And so we don't have any erosion costs, but let's leave this line in our model just because it might show up in later problems for you or in later analyses. So you may as well leave it in there, just keeping it as a reference that erosion costs might be part of your analysis. Okay, so now what else? So I should note that this is picking up the book value of positive 662, which is basically the last year of depreciation. So this book value calculation needs to take into account the fact that we need to go out to column H here, out to year 6. And then it'll give us a 0 on the book value, and therefore there's no tax on the gain and there's no cash flow. Okay. Take out my note. All right. So now, the hard part. Calculations, so we'll say working capital calculations. Working capital analysis. Okay. So our required cash flow is going to be 25% of the following year's revenue. Okay. 25% of the following year's revenue. So make that a percentage. And let's indent that so we'll know that this is subsidiary. Okay, so our required working capital. So in the first year, or in the beginning of time, actually, let's move that up there. Okay, so now we can go ahead and create our analysis. Right, so our required working capital at the beginning is going to be 25% of revenue, which should give us that 2.7 million. Yep. Okay. So let's go ahead and make that 25% an absolute cell reference and bring that calculation across. Now, keep in mind that we do have to do something about the working capital here in year 6 because the project is going to end, right? So the working capital in year 6 that's required is actually going to be 0. So actually, if we go ahead and take this out, there it is. So we don't need any more working capital in year 6, at the end of year 6. All right. So now the change in working capital from what we started with at the end of the prior year. So let's just start with year 1. because we know that the change in working capital in the first year, at the beginning of time, obviously was at 2.7 million. In year one, we needed $450 more in working capital than what we started with, right? And in year two, we needed $1.5 million more than what we started with. Right, so if these numbers are positive, if these changes are positive, if you need more working capital, then the cash flow is negative. Right? If you need more working capital than what you started with, then your cash flow is going to be negative. So we'll keep that in mind. So we can go ahead and pull this all the way out to year 6. So in year 3, we needed 1.3 million more than we did in year 2. In year 4, we needed $1 million less than what we needed in year 3. So you're starting to burn through your inventory. In year 5, we needed $1.5 million less. So you're continuing to burn through your inventory. And year 6, at the end of time, you're going to just burn through all of it. So you started with 3.1 million in working capital, and then you're going to end with nothing. So you're going to burn through all of it. So you're going to get a positive cash flow from these negative differences in your working capital. Okay, so now that we've figured out our change in working capital, and now that we're realizing that if these changes are positive, then the cash flow from working capital is negative, what we need to do now is go down here and model our change in working capital, which is the negative of the positive numbers that we see up here. So the first one, we're just going to pick up that initial 2.7 as a negative, and the second one, we're going to pick up 450 as a negative. And now that we've got a negative value here, we're going to autofill like that. Right? So again, we spent $450 more in working capital that first year, 1.1 million more the second year, 1.3 million more the third year, and then we spend less on working capital in the fourth year than we did in the prior year, and we spend less in working capital, which means we are having positive cash flows from the changes in working capital, and then at the end, we get it all back. We blow through our inventory. Okay. So now let's just make sure that our operating cash flows are working, which they are. And so it looks like we've got it here. All right, so let's go ahead first of all and just kind of hide these rows, or how about if I insert some more rows? Either way, that won't affect the model. And so let's create a little output table here. This is kind of like a dashboard. Okay, make it white, make it bold, make it centered. Okay, so they're looking for the IRR and the NPV at 13%. So the internal rate of return of this project. So the IRR of this project is going to be 22%. And we can give that a couple more. There we go, 22.28%. And the net present value, remembering that the actual NPV function that Excel uses doesn't actually give you a technical NPV. What you have to do is take the present value of all these future cash flows and then subtract the initial cash flow. And because the initial cash flow is given as a negative, we add that number. So the net present value is 4.6 million. So if we go ahead and look at the answers over here, just to verify, 22.28% and 4.689 million. So there it is, people. Challenge assignment number 2. The only hard part in there was just adjusting the working capital. right? But now you have a model that'll take sales and grow sales. It'll take erosion costs. It will calculate your terminal cash flow due to the sale of equipment. And so this is a very flexible financial model that will accommodate a number of different situations. And from now on, for you in your financial analysis life, you're going to have a model that you can adjust to whatever the situation is that presents itself. Okay? Have fun.